In this unit, we're going to talk about the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland isn't very large, but it has a powerful effect throughout the body. Outside of the digestive system, thyroid health is one of the most common areas I get questions about, both in practice and in teaching. So it may be helpful to just start by talking about some of the functions of the thyroid gland, and then from there we'll dive into the anatomy and we'll talk a little bit about the hormones of the thyroid gland. So the thyroid does a range of things throughout the body, and this is why we see such a diverse amount of symptoms associated with this gland. One of the functions that we associate with thyroid hormones is metabolism. Often people are curious about how to shift their metabolic rate by asking about thyroid. It's important to clarify here that when we say metabolism, what we're actually talking about is energy production. So thyroid hormones influence how the cells produce energy. And if you have a cell that produces more energy, it uses more calories, and so therefore it affects weight. But on the other side of things, if you have a cell that produces more energy, it increases heat. So we also see that the thyroid affects heat production. In terms of heat and body temperature, if you have an overactive thyroid, people tend to feel hot. If you have an underactive thyroid, people tend to feel cold. So sometimes body temperature changes can be a signal that something's happening with the thyroid. Another place that the thyroid influences is the nervous system, and this is because our neurons require a huge amount of energy. So if your thyroid function is low, it means that you have less energy available for your nerves. And that means that most people with thyroid conditions feel it in their nervous system. So for example, they feel diminished reflexes if they have a low thyroid, or they have hyperreflexes if they have a high thyroid. Sometimes it affects mood, sometimes it affects cognitive function, so the ability to focus or think clearly. So if we think about the nervous system and its need for energy, then we can see that the thyroid supports energy in the nerves. And then of course, this also relates to muscle because muscles are another tissue that use a lot of energy. So if you have a thyroid change, you actually start to see it in muscle energy. And so the way that shows up is fatigue. Often when people have a low thyroid, they have pretty significant muscle fatigue and heaviness. And because they can't actually fire their muscles to move them well. On the flip side of things, when people have a hyperthyroid condition, they might actually have overtense or overactive muscles. Another function of thyroid hormones is cell division. So there's areas of the body that have a high cell turnover, and this can include the lining of the digestive tract, for instance, but also in fetal development. So we need really healthy thyroid function for several parts of the body. The last area I want to mention is protein synthesis. This is another function of the cells, and your cells are constantly generating new proteins. Where we see this in the body is in places like the skin, the hair, and the nails. So for instance, really dry skin or hair that starts falling out can be associated with a low thyroid. The opposite is true with a hyperthyroid. In those situations, people will notice that their nails will grow really fast and their hair will grow really fast. So these are the functions of the thyroid hormones, and hopefully now you're getting an idea for how many diverse roles they play in the body. Let's talk for a moment about thyroid anatomy. The thyroid is a gland, and it sits just around the outside of the trachea. So you can actually feel it sometimes with your fingers if it's swollen or if there's a nodule there. It's pretty superficial. What I want to focus on, though, are the thyroid hormones. This is what people are really interested in, and also what is going to be tested if you're going to assess the thyroid. So let's just go through some of the common thyroid hormones. The first one I want to mention is thyroid stimulating hormone. This is also referred to as TSH. This is a hormone that actually comes from the pituitary. And if you remember, we talked about how the hypothalamus signals the anterior pituitary, which then signals the thyroid. And so this is what we're talking about here, that the anterior pituitary makes a hormone called TSH, and it stimulates the thyroid. This hormone is the number one test for thyroid function. So if you're interested in your thyroid and you go to your doctor and ask for some blood work, they will test your TSH levels first. What's interesting about this is it also has an inverse relationship to your thyroid function because it's a negative feedback loop. What that means is that when your TSH levels are high, it means your thyroid function is actually low because you're not making enough thyroid hormones to talk back to the pituitary gland and slow it down. The opposite would be true if your TSH levels are low. That usually indicates that your thyroid function is high. So you're producing an excess amount of hormones, which are talking back to the pituitary and suppressing it. It's a really interesting inverse relationship. So TSH is the first one. And again, this is the most common test that's done for the thyroid. The second hormone I want to mention is called thyroxine. This is also commonly referred to as T4. So T4 basically means that there's a tyrosine with 4 iodines. It's a really simple structure for the hormone. T4 is the most abundant thyroid hormone that's made directly from your thyroid. So it circulates throughout your body. And T4 has low activity. Sometimes it's even called the inactive form. What happens is that T4 gets converted into a more active form, a form known as T3 outside the thyroid and in your cells. So T4 is the inactive form of the thyroid hormone, which then gets converted into T3. It's also worth mentioning that one of the most commonly prescribed medications in North America is synthetic T4. This is a really common hormone replacement for thyroid function. The next thyroid hormone that we'll mention is T3. This is also known as triiodothyronine. So T3 is the active form of thyroid hormone. It has a really powerful effect on the body. Your thyroid does make this in small amounts, but mostly we get T3 from the conversion of T4. We don't generally give a lot of T3 for therapy because it's so active that it actually only lasts a short period of time and it can sometimes cause anxiety. So usually a T3 supplement or a T3 hormone will be given in conjunction with a T4. T4 needs to be converted into T3. And so the final thing I want to mention is that sometimes when people have thyroid issues, it's not because of the thyroid itself. It has to do with their ability to convert. So you can have a fairly healthy thyroid, but not convert your T4 into T3. So this is another area that we'll talk about which supplements can support the conversion of T4 into T3. In summary, the thyroid influences many functions in the body. And so we want to be thinking about how to support thyroid synthesis, getting enough iodine, supporting tyrosine, and giving selenium. If it's an autoimmune condition, we want to support modulating the immune system. And finally, we want to look at the specific symptoms that are associated with the thyroid condition. Now we're going to be moving into the nervous system.